Welcome to Lauro Rizzatti's podcast, Verification Perspectives. Lauro's guest today is Bob Smith, Executive Director of the Electronic System Design Alliance, an international association of companies providing goods and services throughout the semiconductor design ecosystem. Bob explains the name change from EDAC to the ESD Alliance in 2016 and identifies a few trends the alliance is tracking, including the future of Moore's Law. Now, let's hear from Lauro and Bob on the state of the system design ecosystem.
Hi, this is Lauro Rizzatti, and we have here today Bob Smith. Bob, can you briefly state your name, title, and work affiliation?
Sure. My name is Bob Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the Electronic System Design Alliance, which a lot of people refer to as either the ESD Alliance or just ESDA.
Thank you, Bob. ESDA used to be called EDAC, formed in 1989. Why has the name changed, and what is actually the role of ESDA today?
That's a great question. I think just very briefly, you're correct. EDAC, the EDA consortium, had been around since 1989, and actually it was really formed to serve the kind of group interests of the EDA vendors. That was a very rapidly growing market. There was a lot of money going into it and so forth. And the organization thrived. But like many other, markets in the technology sector, our world is really changing. And the board recognized, I think, several years ago that things were slowing down. Of course, there was a lot of consolidation, and they really began kind of soul searching, I think, on, where do we go with this organization? I was asked to come get involved, and my observation was that the design environment for semiconductors was actually thriving, but it wasn't just EDA. EDA is a critical part of it, but it was other areas such as intellectual property, embedded software, alternative ways to scale systems using clever packaging and so forth. So we decided to rebrand it and actually rename the organization to reflect that. And we decided that getting the word system in there was critical. And so we came up with Electronic System Design Alliance. And the reason we picked Alliance and not consortium was some of us felt, it was very, very subtle, but some of us felt that alliance was a more positive word in terms of meaning, working together as opposed to consortium. Like I said, very subtle, but sorry for the long answer, but that's really how the name change came about. And I guess to answer what is our role, it's really simply to represent the common interests of companies that are either providing goods and services to the semiconductor design ecosystem.
Thank you, Bob. Actually, it makes sense what you say. I remember EDAC used to keep track of the revenues of EDA, including intellectual property. I assume ESDA will do the same. That was on a year-by-year basis. Can you share with us what the trends of the industry are? And you already mentioned that there's a lot of activity and new things coming up. Is there anything that is worth reporting?
Well, yes, I think so. First of all, yeah, you're correct. We still are doing what we call the MSS, or Market Statistics Service. That's actually published on a quarterly basis. And over the years, it has been expanded, as you said, beyond basic EDA type functions to include things like IP. And in fact, we're having some discussions about broadening it even beyond that. But back to the question, the most noticeable trend that is actually happening right in front of us is the amount of money or revenue that's being generated by semiconductor IP. Back in 1997, it was the single smallest category that was tracked in the MSS in terms of dollars. And in the second or third quarter of 2015, it actually eclipsed the largest category in EDA, which is what we categorize as CAE, which are all the front-end design tools. So IP actually went past CAE, and it's also growing at a cumulative annual growth rate that's somewhere in the order of 17 to 20%. So it's pretty phenomenal how rapidly it's growing.
That's very interesting, Bob. Recently, over the past 2 or 3 years, there has been lots of talks about the looming end of Moore's Law. What is your opinion?
I'm glad you asked. Yeah, this is something I'm pretty passionate about, actually. So a couple of comments. Moore's Law is not ending. That's my opinion. But the way that we think about Moore's Law is changing quite drastically. And maybe the best way to describe that is, I would argue that we are now at the threshold as designers. We're moving away from a chip-centric world to a system-centric world.
Yeah.
I recently had the opportunity to speak at a conference in Europe, and one of the things that I noticed and have been noticing about electronics companies in Europe is that they're very systems oriented. Do they use ASICs and do they use silicon in their designs? Absolutely. But the way they think is, hey, we're building systems here. So yes, we need chips, and yes, we need software, and yes, we need sensors, and we need all these things, but we're actually building a whole system.
Right.
The EDA industry, just by contrast, in the early days was extremely chip-centric, and to a certain extent, it still is. Okay, so I'm a little off topic here. Let me come back to Moore's Law. So the reality is the cost per transistor started going up again in 2012, 2013. And the reason for that is even though we can get the smaller geometries, the better density, the cost to produce these transistors is going up faster than the other benefits. And it will be good for some companies, but it will be a small number of companies, less than 10, that are going to be able to afford to do large chips in either, let's say, 7 nanometers or 5 nanometers. Now, what is happening is we're still extending Moore's Law, and the way we're doing it is through this whole emerging trend called multi-die IC design, where instead of integrating at the transistor level, we're integrating at the functional level. And there's already a lot of talk about designing using chiplets, or some people call them dielets, which are really small pieces of silicon, known good die, typically small, maybe 3 millimeter by 3 millimeter or smaller, and integrating those either on a wafer substrate, on an interposer, and so forth. There's a lot of work to be done there. But that's, I believe, how Moore's Law is going to continue to follow us in the future. And there are a lot of benefits to this technique. Since the interconnects are much, much shorter, much more efficient, you get the benefits of better performance with less power. And I could go on and on about it. But again, I don't think Moore's Law is dead. I do think that how we follow Moore's Law, though, is changing. And it will be through this kind of system approach based on multi-die.
Very interesting, Bob. Very interesting. Let me ask you this. On Monday, November 14th, Mentor Graphics announced that Siemens made an acquisition offer. Board members and investors responded with excitement. Assuming the transaction will succeed, would you see this as a positive event for EDA?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a positive event for EDA in the sense that it is a bit of a wake-up call, maybe. I think it's very interesting that Siemens is the one that emerged to acquire Mentor, because going back to my earlier comment about Europe, Siemens is first, they're a very big company, but they're also they're very much in the systems market. And I would argue that out of the big EDA players, Mentor is the one that has invested the most to the system design area. I think most notably, they're very involved in the automotive market. And as we all know, we're watching an automotive market that's changing from rubber and steel to processors and software, even though some of the other stuff is there.
Yeah.
So I think the wake-up call is that, hey, this system design, if we're going to keep growing and kind of catch up with the market is going, we need to start investing in more system design techniques, not abandon our chip design tools. They're still critical, but I think the bigger growth is ahead of us in system design. And I think this acquisition is kind of the first bellwether, if you will, or mark as to where our market could very likely head.
Yeah, essentially I agree with you. And I see this as a great move for our industry.
Yeah, I feel so too.
Okay, Bob, thank you very much for accepting to interview today.
Well, thank you, Laura. It was my pleasure, and happy to do it anytime. Always happy to venture an opinion.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast of Lauro Rizzatti's Verification Perspectives. Join us next time for another interesting and in-depth conversation. For more episodes, please visit www.rizzatti.com. That's RIZZATTI.com.